Tonight's video is on angles and the unit circle. We've evaluated a lot of trig ratios like these ones, and it's important to be able to think about where the reference angle is. This one is in the third quadrant because it's bigger than pi. Because pi is 6 pi sixths. It's a pi sixth bigger, which means we have a pi 6 reference angle. This is a ratio of 1, square root of 3, 2. Now, since this is in the the third quadrant, those two sides are both negative. The cosine is the adjacent over the hypotenuse, so it's negative square root of 3 over 2. Cosecant of pi fourths. Pi fourths is its own reference angle. So we have a pi fourths angle here. 1, 1, square root 2. None of those is negative. And so we can go with the hypotenuse over the opposite. The hypotenuse is the square root of 2. The opposite is 1. So you got square root of 2 or 1, which is square root of 2. We have the secant of negative pi. Negative pi goes to this axis. It's one of our quadrantal angles. And the triangle, which does not actually exist, has ratios like this, where it's a 1-to-1 ratio between the adjacent and the hypotenuse, and there's no such thing as the opposite side. So secant is the hypotenuse over the adjacent, so it's 1 over negative 1, which is negative 1. In our fourth problem, we have the tangent of 135. That's going to be in the second quadrant. And we have a 45-degree reference angle because 45 degrees more than 135 to get to 180. Our ratios are 1, 1, square root of 2. The adjacent is negative because we're going in the negative direction, although the opposite is positive because it's going upward. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. So opposite of this 45 is the positive one. Adjacent of it is the negative one. So we have the tangent being negative 1. Next, we have the cotangent of negative 4 pi thirds. Negative 3 pi thirds would get us to the axes. We have one more pi thirds, which is also going to be our reference angle, which gives us this being square root of 3, this adjacent being 1, and the hypotenuse being 2. It's a negative 1 on the adjacent because it's going in the negative direction, being in the second quadrant there. Cotangent is adjacent over opposite. The adjacent is negative 1 over the opposite, which is the square root of 3. Well, and then we got to rationalize that, so we'll multiply by the square root of 3 in the numerator and denominator to get negative square root of 3 over 3. The sign of 3 pi halves, that would be representing the axes down below, where you have this 0, negative 1-to-1 ratio. The sign is the opposite of a hypotenuse, so you have negative 1 over 1, which is negative 1. In number 7, I can see it's telling us something about B already. It's telling us that B is between 3 pi halves and 2 pi, which tells us it's somewhere in the fourth quadrant. It's in the fourth quadrant with a cotangent being negative 5 over 4. All right, cotangent is adjacent over opposite. So the adjacent right here, I'm not going to put negative 5 here. I'm going to put negative 4 here, because the opposite in quadrant 4 is the part that is negative. Well, if we want to find this hypotenuse, we have to do the quadratic formula, the Pythagorean theorem. Now that would help us because we need to find the sine of this angle B, which is its opposite over its hypotenuse. It's going to be negative 4 over something. I just got to know what that, we have to know what that something is. So we can go find it. 25 plus 16. This is the square root of 25 plus 16. 25 plus 16 is 41. So the square root of 41. So we have -4 square root of 41 over 41. That's all for our video today.